Welcome everyone. So today we have already heard about many topics, and when the speakers talked, then sometimes they showed graphs and so on, and all of this is part of what all of us do very often and what we talk about all the time, but maybe not enough: evaluation. Right? So evaluation is super important to ensure the reliability of the systems that we publish, to make sure that they run accurately, to make sure that they are fair. It is important to measure progress in our field, right? To compare the different approaches, compare with the state of the art. And in the end, one could say evaluation is the backbone of our science, our field, and our community, because it drives also all the discussions that we are having. However, evaluation also needs to be robust and also needs to be reliable and accurate. And currently we are facing challenges. And this is why we are going to have a panel today to discussing those challenges and also solutions. And my name is Anne Lauscher. I already talked a little bit today. I'm a professor of data science in Hamburg. Then we have to the right side Steffen Eger, full professor of natural language processing at the University of Technology Nuremberg. We have Goran Glavaš, who is also full professor at the University of Würzburg, holding the chair for natural language processing. Then to the very left, we have Iryna Gurevych. You have just heard from her, who is a full professor at the Technical University of Darmstadt and has also other affiliations. And then we have also Yunyao Li, directly to my left, Director of Machine Learning at the Adobe Experience Platform. So let's maybe start directly with some generic questions that I have prepared and that are really burning under my toes. But this challenge or this panel should also be interactive. So whenever you have questions, just raise your hand. I will also start encouraging you at some point in time more and more. Maybe let's start then with you, Yunyao, sorry. So what are the biggest challenges that we are currently facing in evaluation, in your opinion?
I think there is no short answer to this question, but largely speaking, I would say challenges come in two aspects. One aspect of evaluation from academic research aspect, right? I think that's one type of challenge. I think many of us are familiar with, all the things about how do you construct the proper data set, how do you construct the proper metrics and the actual evaluation from automatic evaluation to human evaluation, or maybe human-in-the-loop evaluation. The second aspect I'm going to talk a little bit more is going to be about the evaluation for production system, because I feel that's a part maybe many of you are not familiar with, right? I touched upon it a little bit earlier. I think the part related to academic evaluation is still relevant, right? Construct the data set, metrics, and the actual evaluation. But then another challenge is how do you repeat this evaluation on continuous basis where the system is changing, data is changing, user is changing. And then on the data set side, that's also another challenge. Like, I think in academia, like myself included, right, when we work on different tasks, there is normally some kind of benchmark data available, right? But in production system, everybody needs to, or whoever building the model, kind of need to become an evaluation expert in some sense. There needs to be some basic understanding of how to construct the data set throughout the entire organization. If there is no such understanding, then someone like me, right, like I'm leader in the organization, I need to educate the team, I need to create the process and a system for it to happen. The general literacy, I would say it's one big challenge.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I could call you or name right. Yeah, but you can also just go ahead if you have a thought that you think is important.
So I can connect to this. So this human evaluation is currently the reason that the gap between industry and academia is becoming smaller, right? Because large language models are not evaluated in a static way when they are used for a specific task, but then they have to dynamically incorporate these user preferences. So our work deals much with simulating user preferences to evaluate academic systems. And I think this is exactly the issue you have because, well, at least I hope industry does not conduct an experiment on millions of users. Before that, there is some piloting or simulation or small scale study, right? And I think we also have exactly same issue because large language models are used in interaction for various purposes.
Yeah, I think.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in fact, that's one thing I had a question like last year to some of the tutorial instructor about HCI for NLP. I think exactly to the point where now the languages are generated dynamically, right? It's difficult to actually use traditional benchmarks. So somehow all of us need to understand how to evaluate a human-centered system.
I think that is very interesting. So moving more into interactive systems, but do you think then that like these standard measures that we usually have, like accuracy, for instance, precision, recall, F1, bleu, have they become obsolete or should we still use them? Or in what setups do they make sense?
I don't think they make much sense anymore unless I don't know if you're doing translation and blue has been proven. I mean, blue, just focus on a concrete example you took there. Blue has been criticized for several decades, right? And then we have all these semantic measures and they are not correlating more with human satisfaction that with the quality translation than blue does. So sometimes for some tasks, it is clear that certain metric can survive and you can use it and it's a reliable metric. I think the problem with evaluation today is that we want models that are extreme generalizers. We want models that can solve any task zero shot, right? And the question is, how do you evaluate that? Because you can't secure data contamination, that there hasn't been data contamination for any static content on the web, right? And then if you have some dynamic fluctuating benchmarks or chatbot arenas or LLM arenas and so on, there is a lot of subjectivity in the process. Sure, you're sampling it over a lot of, but it's not something that can be easily reported in papers. So you still need some kind of static benchmarks. So maybe the way to go is something like what Iryna mentioned they did with NLP version 2. Distribute the test set on demand and strictly ask people not to, open it, forbid them to open it. But yeah, I think there's a mismatch between what we need in academia when we publish papers, and that's here's the benchmark, and people need to know characteristics of these benchmarks to be able to judge your contribution of your paper. And the problems that brings, and that's that if the benchmark static, you have contamination, and whether that correlates with actual benefits in companies and real deployment setups. And I've heard anecdotally from people who are in working companies in various business scenarios that LLMs are much less useful there than is generally considered for the general public, right? So no easy solution. Yeah.
Share the mic. Yeah, so you asked about the traditional metrics and if they still have some usage. Maybe so Goran said they have no usage.
No, I actually said quite the opposite for specific tasks and metrics that have been proven.
Yeah, okay. So I would say, for example, if you talk about Blue, they still have a use case, for example, in terms of efficiency. if you need to evaluate something quickly, then they could also. So there's some signal in the metric, so you could also use them as reward signal, which is then maybe a cheap signal. You also have explainability from them. Another use case would be comparability. If you want to compare to an older system that has still reported a blue score, then that might be, you might still want to use that. And also, if we look at it from a practical perspective, reviewers may be satisfied if you report blue, so there's also still a usage. I think, my students every now and then check which metrics are actually being used, and turns out those old metrics are still among the most used and most reported metrics. So there's still in the community this belief that they are useful for some purpose, or at least reviewers are satisfied with them.
So can I add a new aspect to this question? So I think the big challenge is the open-end nature of the generative outputs. And as I've shown in my talk, we don't have one ground truth, but we have a variety of valid solutions, which may be a good or not so good solution depending on the context of interaction and the preferences that I've been talking about. And one popular methodology nowadays is, of course, LLM as a judge. And we do know it's not a very good methodology, but I think research can be done how to make it better. And basically, in our work, we attack this from two angles. So one angle is we try to split evaluating the complex output in a set of criteria. And then I think these classic measures can be useful for some of them, and for the others, we can specialize the LLM as a judge to judge that specific criterion. So I think that, like, nowadays, a lot of exciting research is possible in this scope.
We also know that there are, of course, a lot of issues with these approaches, LLM as a judge, right? Because, for instance, people have shown that they have like this narcissist bias, so they tend to evaluate the old generations as better often than other models. And so I agree with you that there is really a lot of exciting research. But do you think we will arrive at a point in time where we can say this is like a reliable evaluation for really like a complex scenario such as you were drawing it before with like these interaction in expert domains and so on?
It's very hard, but I do think it's possible, at least for some tasks. So we have seen some success in our work on the same related work generation. Recently, this is what I hinted at, that it's going to be pre-printed very soon. So we conducted a human study validating these results. And we have shown that LLM as a judge, but not these vanilla versions, but like specifically specialized versions, and the recipe will be presented in that paper, right? So they can evaluate similarly to human experts. So at least like this shows that it is possible, but this is just one task, right, of creative text writing. And of course, like if you think of repository level code generation, this is much harder, right? So to split the evaluation of a repository level code into a set of measurable criteria that follow the human preference, which is subject to a huge variability itself, right? But I just wanted to make the point that we should not just put up with the argument that LLM as a judge has all these deficiencies. I think many things can be done to make it more useful, at least for specific applications, if not for all.
Can I make one comment? So I know a lot of investigation about the effectiveness and design of LLM as a judge, right? One thing I want to point out is a lot of time we say LLM as a judge is as good as a human. However, one we need to realize it also takes a lot of efforts for human to provide a good label, right? So in fact, if we look at the HCI literature, there was a lot of study about how do you effectively do crowdsourced evaluation, right? Because some of the tasks, even if you give to 5 people, they all agree, they can all be run because the task was designed in such a way that either the user do not have the expertise to answer the question, or the task was designed to be too difficult for them. So I think just be very careful, right? Whether you use an LLM or as a human for job, design is very important. This goes back again to my earlier point. I really hope everyone in NLP field these days have some basic HCI literacy, so that you can design the evaluation for whether use a human or LLM better.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point. And you have also some comment.
I would just very short comment on that. I think we observed in some of our work and also in some papers more that human annotators actually mutually inter-annotate. Their agreement between human annotators on more complex semantic tasks is lower than human LLM agreement, which goes into this direction. We just assume here's a machine, it has these biases and problems that we know of, and humans are great when they do annotations, right? So it's not as black and white. No.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And Steffen also wants to comment on it.
Yeah, can I also comment on the human annotation, because that was also on my list. So I think the human annotation as the ground truth can also be quite flawed in many situations. So I agree with the 2 predecessors. So I think especially in creative tasks, for example, if you think about literature, what I talked about yesterday, or poetry generation, if you generate poetry in English or you translate literature in English, then I think there are probably a lot of ACL papers that would use non-native speakers, and they have their own understanding of English, they have their own biases, and their own imperfect use of English, and so maybe they're not the best judges. And another thing is that it's also known that a lot of annotators use AI. So, so they actually want to make the annotation quickly, and then we have AI coming in the annotation process.
That's why they agree more with LLMs, so judge them mutually. That's a good point.
Yeah, and getting back to this point, so I was wondering, so if we want to make then AI useful for many people, and maybe people who are generally not included in the AI development, how can we do that? Because on the one hand, they are difficult to hire for human annotation studies, and then on the other hand, they are also badly reflected in like the LLM as a judge approaches. And yeah, so I was wondering, have you an idea on reflecting maybe societies more broadly in evaluation, or do we think that anyways we cannot do this?
So this is a tough question, I guess, right? So for that, I think we need to involve expertise of social data science, basically, because this is what they do. And you have made a point, our students should have HCI literacy, so I much agree with that. So in a lot of projects in my lab, we need this. And we started working with an HCI professor to educate ourselves. However, the downside is if you really want to do a proper study, it takes 3 years of the PhD, right? And we don't really have this research interest in this particular point. That's why, science is split in different disciplines. And I think we should leave such really large-scale studies to experts from those disciplines in collaborative work where we contribute the technology and they contribute the actual study. It's just not feasible in the scope of a computer science PhD to do it properly. Another thing I found about the social science methodologies, which is often difficult to publish in the ACL venues, is usually they are studies being methodologically very, very, elaborated, are very narrow, okay? But in NLP, you always have these reviewers who, we have this very complex paper on biomedical research literature, but they want another domain. It's a huge effort, right? And I think it's very difficult to, to work around this trade-off.
Can I make a quick comment? I can completely relate to the struggle about it's very difficult to publish this kind of paper. And in fact, it was precisely one of the motivation why we have industry track. So industry track is not just for researchers from industry. I think industry track really think about whenever you work on some real world problem, it's a value for you to consider. And we have very different review standards. So something to consider.
From the audience, do you have any questions already? Yeah.
Thank you. So as already mentioned that both human annotation and LLM annotations would be could have flaws. Is there like an approach or method to have like human in the loop LLM evaluations?
I can make a quick comment. So in my past team, we have done a lot of human AI collaborative annotation, even before LLM, right? We have active learning, we have different kind of ways to scale the annotation process. I would say in general, two things to bear in mind, right? One is a lot of the time there is a misconception that if you use LLM and to create the initial label and then human confirm, it saves the effort. But what is not taken into consideration is that may introduce a lot of bias, especially LLM is so good these days. And whenever you do this, it could have the risk of LLM plus human is worse than LLM or maybe even worse than human, right? So it's kind of counterintuitive that when you do LLM as a judge put together with human, maybe you want to use a less powerful LLM or less powerful model so that human not automatically trust the automatic labeling, or do it in a different way that you first ask human to do it and then ask the human to reflect with the LLM. So you need to think about the collaboration model to the earlier point, right? Like how human collaborate effectively has been studied for a long time. We need to do similar study about how human AI collaborate.
I would maybe, I fully agree with the point of view, and I think that can basically be summarized that makes sense when the human is really order of magnitude better expert on what needs to be annotated than the LLM. Then you have, I come back to the example of code generation for not trivial educational purposes like create a bubble sort algorithm, but talking about like really more complex things. Code combinations that need to be done for the first time. LLMs are very convincing at generating very convincing faulty code. And then you need someone who really can recognize that. And if people are impressed by the LLM and think it's flawless, then you're not gonna get much from such an expert, such a human fixing or collaborating towards the annotations with. So, if the criteria is that the human is truly an expert and can recognize like convoluted mistakes by the LLM could work.
Yeah, maybe I can also give an example from the talk I gave yesterday. So there we had LLM for literature evaluation, and as you saw, the LLM as a judge approach was quite bad. I had this adequacy statistic, which was like 10% or 20. And then we integrated humans, experts like literature experts in the LLM as a judge approach. So we used questions from books, but then we let also professional translators vote on those questions, and then the metric improved quite a lot. So if you have strong humans, and I think then that can work well.
So basically, all of this is discussed in the Nature article I cited in my talk. So there was the slide about combinations of human and AI do not always perform great, or whatever the title. So if you want to deeper understand this issue, I highly recommend this article because it's a meta study across a lot of different tasks and a lot of different user groups.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I had a quick question. So basically, in the tasks, like how can we verify the like how are the basically the individual in the terms we have crowdsourcing? So how can we confirm the kind of expertise in a sense? Because even when the task kind of becomes more complex, basically how can we make sure these steps that come out from that kind of they're faithful? I mean, they're kind of people they are actually who say they are, because now we have many like crowdsourcing platforms, but then there's no way to actually evaluate kind of like the qualifications of the expertise.
Don't use crowdsourcing for any complex task. Crowdsourcing is meant for very simple things, and that's it.
Yeah, but I would add, so there are some platforms where you can actually have some knowledge about the qualifications of the people. They have also ratings, and so, I mean, there's some quality assurances on some platforms.
To go slightly against that point, Prolific is known as a platform for languages, natural languages, expertise, and we went for it for fairly straightforward annotations, post-editing for a few major languages and got horrible results back. And it's supposed to be better for kind of translation-based tasks than, you know, like Crowdflower or some more generic crowdsourcing. So I have very low confidence in crowdsourcing. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm asking the question, with my experience kind of the same.
And if you're going to use crowdsourcing annotations to compare that somehow against LLM as a judge kind of judgments, I don't think that makes a lot of sense either. Crowdsourcing annotations are not going to tell you much about the quality of LLM as a judge is judgments. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Right? Like to my earlier point, you know, like regardless you are using crowdsourcing or LLM as a job, you need to establish a baseline that you can fully trust. Then you know whether the crowdsourcing or LLM as a judge is reliable. Right? Otherwise, you will not know. You're going to get some number, but then no way that you can actually understand how to interpret that number.
Hello, I have a question. There's a point that has been raised, I think it's very interesting, which is about, for example, the evaluation in industry and evaluation in academia. They have followed a different standard. For example, there's a gap in terms of evaluation. For example, in academia, evaluation is like lab-based evaluation, so the evaluation led by lab researchers, but the industry evaluation is led by field workers, for example, right? But I'm wondering how, for example, as academics, how possible for us to close or mitigate the gap between the lab evaluation and the field evaluation.
I can take this question first. So I think the main difference between evaluation industry and academia, right? I would say one key difference besides, you know, like all the complexity in terms of organization is in academia, you do evaluation for the purpose of a paper. Once your evaluation for that paper is done, it's done, right? You do not need to rethink about my system changed, my data changed, I need to redo it. But in industry, when we're doing evaluation not for the purpose of a paper, right? Like sometimes we do that, but most of the time it's about how do I know my product is working and it remain working, right? That basically means that I need to maintain some stability of the evaluation methodology, but at the same time, I need to account for the fact I have different system now than 3 months ago. The user use my system differently now than what I have 3 months ago, right? So like, how do you take that into consideration and be able to design a system that everybody follow and you have some reasonable confidence about your system is improving when you launch a new model or a new feature. The second, I think another interesting aspect that I did not realize until I work in a product team is eventually, like, when we think about evaluation, we think about the model or the system. But from business point of view, it's not something they care about. They design some number that matters from business point of view, right? For example, if I design a conversational AI assistant, right? So we would think about maybe accuracy is most important. But what the business care about is how much the user likes the system. And the user may not like it, even though your system is accurate. Give you an example. If my system can only do 10 tasks, right? But the user wants to have 11th one supported, and I can always correctly detect that the user asking for the 11th task that I cannot do, and I will correctly tell the user I can do this 10 tasks, but I cannot do 11. What will happen is the user will be very frustrated, right? They will give a thumb down, even though my model is working 100%. So this is a very interesting aspect, like until you're working on a product team, you probably will not care about.
I would maybe add a small comment. So that was a very good point where the academics are at advantage compared to industry. So we have fixed static benchmarks, we evaluate on them, we publish the paper, good, let's move on to the next paper. That's more difficult in industry. On the other hand, when we do our experiments, they have to be ultra mega transparent. All your hyperparameter optimization, everything needs to be a very, very clean baselines and so on. Whereas in industry, you can do any dirty fix that gets the job done at deployment, right? Dirty from the point of view that would be judged in an academic publication as unfair, whatever, or unfair evaluation or something, right? So at evaluating, it's easier for us, but at developing models that work or that can do some job good without caring about what's the baseline or what's something else, I think that's maybe the advantage on the industry side compared to the academia.
A lot of research studies the like a chain of thought reflection or self-evaluation of the models. Should that become a part of standard evaluation pipeline, and should self-reflection, self-evaluation of the models be trusted?
Who is the next one?
I think LLMs have been shown to prefer their own output. So they will also, self-reason that they were right because of this and that most of the time. So there is the self-bias as well. But beyond that, if you can show it relatively reliably that, self-questioning, self-evaluation brings gains, or they can change or fix errors, and there is plenty of work. We have a paper at ACL that basically shows that if you ask for a lot of facts, like how much is the GDP of Germany in Chinese yuan, you get a very wrong number. But if you tell it explicitly, please think about the amount in euro or in dollars and then convert it into the yuans, then it does well, right? So why not? It makes a lot of sense to go for chain of thought or self-fixing if it works, keeping in mind that there are self-biases at play as well.
So my question kind of continues in line with the previous question. It talks about biases as well. I've only recently started using LLMs as a judge to judge, again, generated output. And what I've experienced is that there is a strong positive bias. All scores tend to be among the highest. Every generated text is perfect, apparently. Even if I ask it to rank, it will give me 4s and 5s out of 5s all the time. I try many ways to do it. ranking, forcing it to do different things, and it just thinks everything is perfect. So my gut feeling is that this is because the LLMs we use as a judge are somewhat trained to be polite and helpful and affirmative, very good things for a user experience, because that's where they come from, industry, but not so useful as judges. This is a bit off the cuff, but should we have different LLMs as judges?
Yeah, maybe I can say something on this. Yeah, there's research on that indeed confirms the phenomenon that you have mentioned, that they want to satisfy the user, I think, and I think that has something to do with the human alignment, because human users may prefer positive answers over perhaps factual answers sometimes, and perhaps, yeah, maybe that can be fixed at this stage. So if we change the human alignment, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that you could just train LLMs and judges. I would assume something like that exists out there, but you can train them for with a different alignment objective. So alignment training can be different from LLMs that are to serve as judges compared to normal regular LLMs. Right?
So I agree with that. This is what I meant with specialized LLM as a judge, but also you can try to change your task definition. So maybe if you define your task differently, you will not see what you currently see.
Okay, as we are slowly moving towards ending the session, I want to zoom out again a bit because we have now some more technical questions. So basically, I was wondering if you had two big wishes for our community relating to evaluation. What would it be? Like, what were there's a genie and it disappears after two fulfillments.
So can I
Shall we stop?
have just one?
Yeah.
Let's go with one.
You can send the genie away, that's true.
Okay, so I wish that our community finds a way how we can realistically simulate human in these evaluations, because these are multi-turn interactions with kind of floating, preferences, and I think that would be a very crucial step to get rid of the high expense of human studies.
I would maybe connect to that, but just say I would like that our LLMs and judges can simulate different humans from different geographies speaking different languages, because humans are very different, and I think a lot of our LLMs as judges or LLMs in general are too Western, Anglo, whatever you want to call it, centric. No?
And for my wish, so my wish is not on the technical side. My wish is more on the education side. I wish that in our education system, there's more emphasis on evaluation and more understanding of how to do proper evaluation.
I think I would join the last one. I fully agree with that.
And so now that you have said your wishes, what are we missing towards getting there? So how should we do that? Like, for instance, with the simulation of human judges, this is similar. So how to progress on LLM research themselves, maybe. Is there something which we can learn maybe from other disciplines as well, not only from HCI, towards making LLM judges more realistic?
So one thing I would like to mention that in psychology, they have always a pre-test to qualify the subjects for their study so they can have valid measurements. I think we need something like that. Otherwise, we measure things, but they are half random, so there's just too much noise. I think this we can learn from psychology.
I mean, a rule of any good measurement that you want to do something based on actionable finding is that it's not confounded by things. And when we need to be sure, as in randomized studies in most other scientific disciplines, that we don't have. I mean, we should do randomized studies if possible, to eliminate confounders. And what is typically not randomized already is a cultural background language in human annotations. Okay? We always source annotations from similar demographies.
Okay, so I think these were good points towards moving to the more realistic LLM judge. And now for the education aspect. So what do you think should we do as a community to fulfill your wish? Because genies don't exist, so.
I actually have some ideas on this because even I'm not in education, because of my role in an organization, I need to educate a lot of people, right? So I think one thing is just have people actually go through the exercise of design the data, design the metrics, and look at the outcome themselves, right? Because I feel a lot of time, like when I work with some of the PhD students, I think especially these days, you can just throw everything to code. You just look at the number. You just look at the final number, whether the number is improving or not. You don't really look into the details, what's going on, whether the number makes sense. So as a result, you will not be able to tell, like, is there any problem with the data itself? Is the metrics wrong? Or is the annotation wrong? Yeah, I think that's really the most basic thing, that just have a good practice to say, I'm willing to look at the details.
Yeah, maybe another thing that the community can do is maybe also award papers with like outstanding paper awards or best paper awards that have very thorough evaluation.
I like that.
So they have a second wish.
Okay.
Related to this. So I really wish we teach our students to reason. So I think that reasoning skills, we have been occasionally mentioning this, Goran and me, fact-checking and all of this, is becoming crucial in the new world because it is no more necessary to remember a lot of information. And our university education and also PhDs should be more focused on how to reason. That's becoming a crucial skill. The other skills, read a lot of information, memorize, are becoming obsolete as Latin. So in the old days, you had to speak Latin to get a PhD. So how many of you speak Latin, right? So same for this, like reading a lot of things and, memorizing. But the reasoning is this core skill. And this is related to what you said. Like the students very often remain on the surface level. So they read some surface cues, the numbers, but they don't really understand the underlying insight, and therefore they cannot reason about this. I think this is my wish.
My wish is to teach the students that a single paper that shows something doesn't mean that something is true. So one of the main things that other disciplines, you quoted the meta-analysis, right? In medicine, that's the most common thing. There are tons of meta papers, which basically summarize the findings of tons of studies on the same research question, right? And then that eliminates confounders as well, right? If one study had a confounder, then the others didn't have the same confounder. So the mean will come out from many tests. We don't do that. I feel like my PhD students, I also catch myself doing, this is cool, you can do this by this, and we have no reproducibility. Things are moving so fast that no one tries to reproduce anything, and we take findings and conclusions of paper for granted, and I think that's a pretty big danger going forward, yeah.
Okay, so I think these were all great wishes, and Goran, you now also left us with another issue which we didn't discuss, which is reproducibility, of course, but the time is over, and I also like to thank the people in the audience who asked questions and also our panelists. Let's have a round of applause, and then I think you first.